Tonight on Free Minds TV, we're going to be giving you some updates on the ongoing financial crisis. The small island nation of Iceland is verging on bankruptcy, and there's a lesson there to be learned for the United States and what to avoid. There's a whole lot more to discuss on the economy, with the Federal Reserve increasing the money supply here in the United States. We're also going to be getting into the police state a little bit. The TSA seems to lose their identification. All that and more coming up on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to an all-new Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
Love to invite the viewers to log on to our website, freemindstv.com. We have all the old archives up there, ways you can contact the shows, ways you can help the shows, and a whole lot more, as well as Free Minds Radio, which is live every Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, all at freemindstv.com. All right, Nick, everyone's talking about it. No matter where you go, it seems you can't get away from this economy crisis, the whole meltdown of, well, it's kind of what we've been predicting for way too long. Since Free Minds TV has been on the airways, we've been saying that this is inevitable when we're building up these credit lines and we're printing money supply. We don't have a money-backed system, and we're extending, allowing banks to loan out all this money that they don't really have with the fractional reserve banking system that we have. Coupled that with a money supply that doesn't have anything backing it, you can just print out more of it. This kind of thing was inevitable.
It certainly, yeah. I mean, we've been predicting that, and unfortunately, some people in the media, in the more mainstream media, have been criticizing the free market, and that's really not what created this crisis. Any real free market economist would criticize the fact that the government, through a central bank, in our case the Federal Reserve, and every country has a central bank, is creating money, paper money, that's not backed by anything. There's really no world currency that's actually tied to a gold standard, a silver standard, or any other kind of actual value. It's all just basically IOUs that are printed out, and that leads to rampant credit expansion, and that's what we've seen over the last, some people are saying, couple decades, and we're seeing that bubble start to burst when people realize that maybe these loans aren't going to get paid back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can't just keep on running the credit card forever. Eventually those bills do come due, and I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, anyone who's been in credit card debt knows that eventually you're going to run out of credit and you're going to have to pay the bills. It works if you're an individual, it works if you're a household, it works if you're an organization, and it also works if you're a country. So countries, their credit can run out as well.
Yes, and Iceland is right on the verge of that. In fact, it looks like they may actually be declaring bankruptcy, which is a little bit different for a country. Essentially, they have the International Monetary Fund, which is another organization related to central banking, essentially cover their debts, and they sort of, it's much like personal bankruptcy, but for a country. Now, why this happened in Iceland is that over the last several years, they've really been building up the banking sector of their economy. For the most part, Iceland is known for producing fish. I mean, there's not a whole lot there. It's a country of a little over 300,000 people, and quite honestly, it doesn't have all that much in the way of natural resources. So they went heavily into the financial sector, and now that that's taken a turn for the worse, things aren't going so well. All of the major financial institutions in Iceland were nationalized. I believe it was last week, and there were some other problems. A lot of people in Europe, in England as well as mainland Europe, deposited money in Icelandic banks. Because of credit expansion, Iceland had serious problems with inflation, which is basically when the government prints more money and prices tend to rise. Well, the way you combat that is generally you raise interest rates and make it more expensive to borrow money, but that also means that if you have money sitting in, say, a savings account, usually those interest rates go up too. So people were putting money into Icelandic banks in Icelandic currency, basically switching it over, because they were getting, I believe it was a 15.5% interest rate.
Wow, you're not going to find that on any kind of stocks that you buy or anything, especially a guarantee, because a bank, people think, oh, this is a guarantee, I'm putting it in, I'm going to have my money next week if I put it in with 15% higher, next year with 15% higher. It's tough to find stocks that can guarantee something like that, so you can see where this is pretty enticing for investors, or some just people with money who want to put away, save a couple of dollars.
Right. I mean, you can make a 15% return annually, that's when you start compounding that interest, that's too hard for some people to resist. And that was the case for a lot of investors, including municipal governments in the United Kingdom and other places. I mean, cities were investing their money here because they were getting return on it, and everyone thought that banks were safe. Well, banks weren't safe. The problem is that the financial sector in Iceland was equivalent, the amount of liability there was equivalent to 10 times the gross domestic product of the whole country of Iceland. So they didn't have a whole lot of a real economy backing this up, and now that they've, essentially there have been runs on the bank, they're not able to pay back what depositors are demanding. So they're trying to broker a deal, especially for people outside the country. I believe they're guaranteeing domestic deposits, but some people might lose money on this deal. It really looks like they will. There's just no way that this can get paid back.
Certainly in the world's eyes, it looks like Iceland is going to lose credit when they go out to get more credit. Now it's just not going to be there.
Well, that's the real serious part of this. I mean, a lot of people are hearing, well, what do we care about the financial sector in Iceland? It'll all work itself out. What do we care about people who got hosed from the United Kingdom and Europe who had money in these banks? Well, it's a more serious situation for people, day-to-day, everyday citizens in Iceland, because essentially there's no market for their national currency anymore. They've defaulted on debts. Essentially, it's worthless paper, and when a country can't pay back these debts, that's all people will treat their currency as. It's about the number of krona to euro has about tripled. I think it was like 120 to 1 was the exchange rate like a month ago. Now, really, there's no trading going on, and the last quote that anyone was able to get was something like 340 to 1. So imagine if the US dollar against the euro, right now I think it buys like $1.50 buys 1 euro. About that, roughly. I think it's actually a little bit more you have to spend, but triple that. So then you're spending 450 to 1 euro. You can see how that very quickly makes it difficult to import anything. And for a nation like Iceland, even more so than the US, although we are heavily reliant on importing things, a nation like Iceland can't make food. I mean, they really don't have that much, and this is a bad time of year for that to happen. Obviously, they're heading into the winter time.
Well, I know that one thing that the United States government could do is maybe take a look at Iceland and not fall into that trap, because some new disturbing news has come out. This coming from the Durst organization, which is located in New York City, and it runs the unofficial debt calculator to run up how much national debt the United States is tallying up. How much importing are they doing and exporting their dollars? You know, the biggest export for the United States right now is cash money valued at nothing. Well, what that does is that runs up a national debt pretty quickly. And over the past couple of years, I mean, we've been running up a debt for over a decade now, but over the last couple of years, it's really shot up. And then with these government bailouts, it's really shot up. $700 billion all put on the old credit card of the Uncle Sam. Well, the Durst organization ran out of room on their debt calculator. It's a big old sign that is outside their building, and it runs up the national debt. It spins around. And previously, the billions, when we were in the billions, that was thought like, we're in billions of dollars worth of debt. This is pretty serious. We'll put a trillions number on there just in case, but billions was when it started. Well, then we went into the trillions. We still had room for several years as we're counting up the trillions. But now that it flipped over to $10 trillion last week, they had to use the cash place and put a 1 there. So they have to redo the debt calculator. This one, we're now going to be able to go into debt into the quadrillions. And I know while right now we're saying, what are you talking about? We wouldn't get there. There was also a time when we never thought we'd get into the trillions as well. So just think about it. In the next few years, as we're watching the debt calculator, let's not try to get into the kind of debt that Iceland got into, which can really have serious effects on us. I mean, Iceland's in a situation where they can't pay back their investors, right? They can't pay back their debts that they owe. Can we ever pay back $10 trillion?
It's questionable whether we are already in that situation. I mean, the national debt is, as we've said, $10 trillion, and there's also been government promises that have been made for things like Social Security and Medicare. Over the next couple of decades, those commitments are going to total something, most estimates are about roughly $50 to $60 trillion that the government doesn't have. So either they're going to have to break the promise to people who have paid into Social Security all their lives, or they're going to have to come up with those tens of trillions of dollars. And I just don't know if we're going to be able to come up with the money for the debt that we've accrued so far. If we continue on this path much longer, there's really no way to escape it.
Well, you were saying that Iceland was something like they were importing 10 times more than they were exporting.
Well, it's not an import-export thing. It's simply that they were essentially setting up banks that were issuing all kinds of loans, and because of fractional reserve lending, which is pretty much a standard around the world, when you put, say, $10 into a bank account, the bank is going to make, they're not going to loan out $10 to people for mortgages or car loans. They can apply, say, that $10 and loan out $100. I mean, depending on what's allowed in the particular country, but they loan out more money than they actually have in reserve. That's why it's called, they only have a fraction of the reserve, hence fractional reserve. Sounds kind of dry, but when you think about it, if people start defaulting on their mortgages, you don't actually have to have everyone stop paying or half of people stop paying back their mortgages. It actually only takes a small number of defaults before you've wiped out the bank's reserves or their capital. And that's why we've seen banks essentially failing, even though a relatively small percentage of their loans were, for instance, home loans were in foreclosure. You don't have to have a whole bunch of them go out because the bank doesn't have a whole lot of money compared to the amount of debt that they have.
All right, so we have this system set up. We have a currency that's not backed by anything real and tangible. They're just printing the printing presses, essentially counterfeiting more money, but it has the government seal of approval on it, so it's not counterfeiting. If any of us did it, it would be highly illegal and it would be counterfeiting, but since it's the government's permission to do it, it's all good, so they're doing that. We know that leads into fractional reserve banking and got us into this mess. But what could we possibly do to pull ourselves out? We have all these problems. It seems like the house of cards that the government has built up around us, this huge financial system that's teetering on the brink of collapse. We know the problems there. What could we do about it? What are some solutions we can do? And what can the viewers at home possibly have their voice be heard on this?
Well, Downsizer DC, which we promote regularly on this show, has some solutions. One of them is the Honest Money Act, which was introduced by Representative Ron Paul of Texas. Essentially what the Honest Money Act would do is either have the U.S. Treasury or introduce gold and silver-backed money again, or allow private companies to do that. The federal government has had a track record of shutting down private companies that issue gold and silver as essentially money. They shut down the Liberty Dollar. And basically, we can't shut down the Federal Reserve overnight. Nobody's really saying that we could. That would cause a sudden economic collapse. However, if we start introducing gold and silver back into the money supply now, people will probably gravitate towards something that has actual value behind it, and we can gradually phase out the paper money that we have right now, the greenbacks, and transition into something that's actually tied to value and that prevents these kinds of credit expansions. Now, I'm not saying we're really going to be able to avoid a recession. I don't think there's any way to do that. A lot of Americans right now, some of them are promoting these bailout packages, these financial stimuluses. That's just pushing the problem further down the road and making it worse. And there's no way to correct this credit problem without going through a painful period. I mean, basically, the U.S. economy is addicted to cheap credit right now, and we can't keep going on that course, or we'll end up like Iceland. So we have to wean ourselves off that credit, and transitioning to easy money is probably the best way to do that. So go to downsizerdc.org, and you can click on, they have a campaigns button right there at the front of the site, and you can find the Honest Money Act there, and it's very easy to sign up. Let all your representatives and senators in Washington, D.C. know what you think about that, and tell them that you'd like to see honest money restored. I mean, in the Constitution it says that the Congress can't emit bills of credit, which is essentially what they do now, and only gold and silver are going to be lawful currency in the U.S. Well, it hasn't been that way for a very long time in the United States.
Right. I mean, almost 100 years now we're going on since we created the Federal Reserve and started getting off the gold-backed system. So, I mean, it's a lot better solution than anyone else is promoting. If you listen to either of the presidential candidates, both of them just say kick the can down the road, more government bailouts, more influx of fake money into the system, which is really only going to push a problem down the road and make it bigger in the end.
Right. I mean, the bigger you make the bubble, the more the more severe the crash is going to be. And you know, people were predicting this for a long time. I know Peter Schiff was one economist who's been out in the mainstream media, and over the last several years, the mainstream media pundits have just made fun of him because he's been predicting pretty much exactly what's going to happen now. And if you look at where he's saying the country's headed, it's actually a pretty dire prediction for the United States. So, you know, hopefully we can turn things around and maybe get a better result out of it. But this has been predicted for a long time, and the people who say they didn't see this coming are probably the ones who are promoting the idea of debt.
Let's see if the American people actually wake up, because Ron Paul's been predicting something like this for the last 20 years. I saw interviews with him 20 years ago when he was running for president where he was saying essentially the same stuff he said this time around. And a year ago, people thought he was a loony for it, and now all the news stations are asking Ron Paul what he thinks, because he predicted this a year ago, and he also predicted it 20 years ago, and it's pretty obvious that this would happen. Yeah, and I wish people would actually make this a major issue in who they decide to vote for. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of choice. Most politicians out there, or new faces out there, are running, and they're going to support the idea of keeping our current monetary system. I think a lot of Americans get it, actually. Those who actually know that we don't have a gold standard. A lot of people still think the dollar's backed by gold. But you should make this an issue and let your representatives know that we need to get off of this debt-based money system, get back to what served us well. I mean, the industrial base of this country was laid on a gold standard, and those people out there saying that we need to have cheap and easy credit to have any kind of economic growth don't know what they're talking about. That's not how the free market works. The free market requires actual investment and labor to be put into it to actually create economic growth. You can't just print money to do that. All right. Well, when we come back, we are going to be talking about the TSA. Are they actually protecting the airports in the sky? Or is it just a whole lot of security theater, people standing around? While we're on break, log on to freemindstv.com/promote. There's all sorts of ways you can help the show from there without spending a dime of your money. It really helps us out. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
Well, thank you, Spencer. This is Mark Edge from Free Talk Live, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, we've reported on the TSA before many times because they don't really seem to do much. They seem to be like Burger King employees are glorified and are searching people instead of serving them hamburgers. So it's kind of like a Burger King employee that doesn't give you a hamburger. They just give you searching and violate your rights. And at least that's been my experience when I go to the airport. It hasn't usually been a pleasant time, and I don't really think they do much. I mean, all this, when they put through fake bombs to see if they'd get through, they miss them over half the time, while they're confiscating your eye drops or your mouthwash or maybe even your drinking water or your baby's formula. They're pretty much an inconvenience, but they claim to be keeping us safe. They're doing their job every day to help Americans and help the nation to keep us safe. Are they really doing that? I've always said no. It's just security theater. They're not actually doing something. They just look like they're doing something. There's lots of them there creating big lines, so it looks like they're actually doing something. They must be doing something, right? Why else would they be standing there? Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem that they can even hold on to their own uniforms and their own badges and also their own access codes. When TSA employees are hired or quit, there's also somewhere down the lines of this great bureaucracy, they forget to turn in uniforms, they forget to turn in badges, they forget to turn in key cards that access secure areas in the airport. And it's starting to become a major problem because now there are starting to become hundreds of cases of examples where the TSA has lost their name badges. They've lost those secure cards. So how secure could the airport be? There's also many cases where employees, like a manager, won't be told when their employees quit or are fired, so they don't know if the person's just gone and when a new one comes back. So there's new faces in the airports all the time. It could just be anyone wearing a TSA uniform getting into secure areas with these name badges that aren't deactivated. Here's a case that's 3 years before they deactivated this one particular TSA's secure badge that gets them into all sorts of places in the airport. Nick, what do you think? Are they keeping us safe, or is it just a waste of our money and a violation of our rights?
The TSA really wasn't going to stop 9/11 if they had been in place in 2001. That's the issue there. At the core of it, I really think it's mostly security theater, because the FBI had been made aware that the people who turned out to be hijackers, they were aware that there was some suspicious activity. They never really followed it up. So the FBI knew that these people were here. Had they known that these people were trying to get on board airplanes on September 11th, they wouldn't have stopped them. I mean, that's how inept the government was leading up to that. And generally speaking, government is not really good at much of anything they try to do. Most Americans would agree that the government's bad at running a business, that they're less efficient than the free market in many respects. However, there's kind of this disconnect when we get into the area of security. There's no reason that the airlines can't provide their own security, and in many cases, I think they'd do a better job if they were left to their own devices and allowed, to decide what kind of screenings passengers had to go through, what kind of security was on the airplane as far as doors to the cockpit, or whether pilots would be armed. I think you'd actually see a much more efficient and a much better functioning security system. And what we have right now is really just a system that violates people's rights, inconveniences them, and to be quite honest, I don't think it actually makes us any safer from a terrorist attack.
Yeah, it's such a big bureaucracy. The chain of command going from manager to manager to manager is lost when people are hired and quit, so it's very easy to lose these uniforms like this. It's if there's 4 bosses down the line before you get to the guy who's actually wearing the uniform and searching the bag, you can see where some people might lose track of their uniforms or name badges, and it would be very easy for someone else to get a hold of those. Maybe a terrorist getting a hold of a TSA name badge, going behind a secure area. I don't know, Nick. To me, it just seems like a waste of time and money having these people here, and I agree with you. Let's leave it up to the airlines, because if nothing else, at least we'd have choice of what we wanted. You want your rights violated? Fine, fly, I don't know, American Air. Well, or you want to take the risks and fly on your own, fly whatever. I mean, at least you'd have the choice.
Right, you'd have that choice, and I'm sure there would be some airlines that were more restrictive, and some people actually like having a lot more security. They probably wish that it was more difficult to get on an airplane today. Well, that's fine. Fly on, let's say Continental decides to do it that way, and you want to fly United instead because you don't want that kind of a long search. I mean, you're really making a decision about your own safety, and I don't think it would make the American people any less safe. To be quite honest, I don't think that if terrorists are going to attack the United States again, they're going to hijack aircraft and crash them into a building. They did that once before. You're really behind the curve, and this is what government does. It's usually pretty reactionary. They like to crack down in one area after it was arguably it was a terrible day on 9/11, but it doesn't make much sense to clamp down on the airport security because that's not the next place the terrorists are going to. They know that it's going to be more difficult to get on an airplane in the United States.
Right. Anyways, we are a local show produced here in Keene, New Hampshire. We are on other stations as well as on the internet, but when stuff happens around here, we like to report on it. This is something that's probably going on all over the country as we speak right now. There are cases where police are violating people's rights, but when it happens here, especially to people who are behind the scenes and people we know, we want to report on it. So Nick, what's going on? So I'm told that Dale and maybe some other people who work behind the scenes here were pulled over and had their rights violated by police?
Yep. Dale, who helps out on the show, and you can look at some of his work over at anarchyinyourhead.com. He was riding back from a party up in Marlow, or that's where they got pulled over, along with some other activists from Keene, Tim, Jesse, Puke. They were riding back, and they got pulled over by the Marlow Police Department. For those viewers outside the local area, Marlow is a very small town. It's pretty rural, and they only have one police officer. So
I think he's part-time police officer.
Yeah, I don't think it's a full-time.
One part-time police officer.
I don't think it's a full-time position. But anyway, the police officer claimed that they were speeding. That's why he pulled them over. Although he didn't have a radar gun, so he just kind of guessed at how fast they were going. Pulled them over, and claimed that he smelled something, basically asked for license and registration, which the driver provided, and Tim was driving. The police officer asked him to step out of the car and made him back away from the vehicle while everybody else in the car stayed in there. And basically the police officer proceeded to open up the door and start searching around the car, even though Tim had said that he didn't consent to a search. The police officer didn't find anything. There wasn't anything to find. And it just goes to show that the police, you do have your rights, and you're better off in a traffic stop situation standing up for them and saying that, no, I don't consent to a search. You can get a warrant if you want to search. That's probably the best way to go. But
then they are supposed to stop and impound your car, aren't they? Isn't that the procedure? If you don't consent to a search, they're supposed to say, okay, well, we'll impound your car and we'll talk about this later. I thought that's the way it was supposed to go. That's the way I've heard it go down in other situations, at least. It
really depends. If the police officer claims that they had probable cause, and in this case they really didn't. I guess they actually claimed that there was some fog on the back window, and that can be a sign that people in the car were drinking. I don't really understand the logic behind that, but that's the account as I've heard it. Again,
or it's October and getting colder outside. Right. And there's a bunch of people in the car, but who am I?
Yeah, I wasn't there.
I didn't go through police training.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I believe the account as it was told to me. Well, obviously, people didn't really appreciate this, especially activists in the local area who are concerned about their civil liberties, their rights, and not being searched without their consent. So Marlow was having its town meeting. Some people called. Apparently, Marlow takes phone calls at their town meetings, and they expressed their concern over what had happened, and they wanted to see the dashboard cam, because most police cars have a dashboard cam that records traffic stops so that there's a record of what happened, so that if there's a dispute, you can turn to that as hard evidence instead of people having to give their word against the police officer's word. Well, it turns out that the Marlow police cruiser hasn't had a working camera in it for 6 months. At least that's what people were told who had called. So the officer's been driving around for 6 months without a camera that's been working. As far as I know, there's no requirement that they have a camera in the car, but based on this incident, I think it's important that maybe the town of Marlow consider fixing that. The officer hadn't had a record of complaints. I think they had had one previous citizen's complaint, but just because they aren't getting a lot of complaints doesn't mean that these things aren't going on.
Well, right, because the people in the car, they weren't found with anything, and they got off with a warning. So most people, when this happens, are great, I didn't even get a speeding ticket, they didn't find anything in my car, I'm happy. But then when you get people who actually know their rights and know the Fourth Amendment and want to stand up for their rights, they're not so happy because they still had to have their rights violated. I don't know how long it took on the edge of the road, and now they have this view of the police. So while most people, this may have happened before, but I think that a lot of people just feel lucky that they got off. No, the police work for us. We don't work for the police. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of people need to get back into. Hold the police accountable, know your rights. I think it really helps out. But we are running out of time. We'd love to hear your opinion on this. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email address, fmtv@freemindstv.com, or you can always leave us a message on our talkback line, 206-350-0123, 206-350-0123. Let us know what you think. Are we just picking on the cops too much, or do the cops actually have to respect people's rights? We'd love to hear from you. Anyways, visit us online. freemindstv.com is the website. Join us this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Times for Free Minds Radio. That's all up on our website as well. We might even be on in your area, but chances are you'll have to listen to us through our website. Well, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night. So talking about...